He set the 2 suitcases down on the sidewalk at 9:52 on a Sunday morning. And he did it gently, which was somehow worse. If he had thrown them, there would have been a story people could tell. A son who lost his temper. A moment that got away from him. But he placed them down the way a man places down groceries he intends to come back for. The wheels were still warm from the trunk. Constance Okoro sat down on the harder of the 2 cases because standing had become difficult. And she watched her son close the front door of the house she had put 29 years of night shifts into. The porch light was on. It was daytime, so nobody could tell that he never turned it off after that morning, not once, in the 8 months that followed. She did not know why she noticed the light. But the woman watching from the blue house across Beatty's Ford Road had already picked up her phone. Constance Okoro was 68 years old, and she weighed 109 pounds, which was 14 pounds less than she had weighed the previous spring. Because the pills for her heart cost $41 every 3 weeks, and she had been splitting them in half so the bottle would last 6. She had been a labor and delivery nurse at Carolina's Medical for 29 years. And for 11 of those years, she had worked the overnight rotation that nobody wanted. The one that ran from 7 at night to 7 in the morning. So that she could be home to walk her son Gerald to school and be there again when he came back. She had a way of folding a blanket that the younger nurses used to stop and watch, corner to corner, smooth flat with the side of her hand, tucked under so tight a coin would bounce off it. She said a made bed told a frightened woman that somebody competent was in the room. She had delivered, by her own count, over 4,000 babies. She kept the tally in a small green notebook with a rubber band around it. And the rubber band had been replaced so many times it had left a pale groove in the cover. That green notebook was in the smaller suitcase, wrapped inside a cardigan the color of dry mustard that she had bought for $2 at a church rummage sale on South Boulevard 11 years ago, and mended twice at the left elbow with thread that did not quite match. The cardigan was clean. She had washed it by hand in the sink of the East Wing bathroom the night before she was moved and hung it over the shower rail to dry. Because a woman who arrives somewhere in a clean garment has told that place something about herself before she says a word. Beside the notebook was a photograph of Gerald at 7, gap-toothed, holding a fish he had not caught. His uncle had caught it and pressed it into the boy's hands for the picture. And Gerald had believed for years that he had reeled it in himself. And Constance had never corrected him. Because there are lies a mother tells that are really just a way of letting a child keep a good morning. She had raised him alone after his father left in 1991, walking out on a Wednesday with a duffel bag and $40 from the coffee tin. And she had never once let the boy see the inside of the envelope, where she kept the electric bill. Her whole life had been arranged around a single principle, which was that a child should never carry the weight of the room he was standing in. She had carried it for him. She was still carrying it, sitting on a suitcase on the sidewalk, because when Gerald's new girlfriend, Marissa, had said over dinner 3 weeks earlier that the house felt crowded and that older people did better in places designed for them, Constance had not argued. She had simply started quietly to pack. She did not beg. She explained to no one. She folded her cardigans the way her own mother had taught her in a 2-room house in Enugu, slowly, as though the cloth were worth something, because to her it was. Her goal that Sunday morning was very small. She wanted to get to the pharmacy on the corner of Halsted before it closed at noon, because her prescription was 1 day from empty. And then she wanted to find somewhere to sit where the wind off the road did not reach her chest. That was all. A woman who had once held a hemorrhaging mother's uterus, closed with her 2 hands until the surgeon arrived, now wanted only to buy her own heart 3 more weeks and find a bench out of the wind. The place Gerald had arranged was called Cedar Grove Assisted Living, and the woman at the intake desk was named Denise. and her name tag was pinned slightly crooked. And she looked at Constance's suitcases before she looked at Constance's face. This is the detail that matters. She looked at the luggage first. Cedar Grove was not a cruel place in the way that word is usually meant. It was a place with rules. Denise explained, without once raising her voice, that the deposit Gerald had put down covered a shared room in the East Wing, that meals were served at 8, 12, and 5:30, that residents were asked not to keep food in their rooms because of ants, and that the heart medication Constance was taking would need to be surrendered to the medication cart and dispensed by staff at approved times. She was following procedure. Every word she said was in the handbook. She was not wrong according to Cedar Grove, and that was the thing that made Constance's hands go still in her lap. There was an orderly leaning against the wall by the water fountain, a young man with earbuds in, and he watched the whole intake without moving. And when Denise slid the medication surrender form across the desk, he looked at the floor. He was not required to do anything. He was 19, maybe 20. He simply had the power to say one warm sentence to an old woman who had spent 29 years saying warm sentences to strangers at the worst hours of their lives. And he chose the floor. And then he chose to turn his music up. And the small, tinny sound of it was the last sound in the room while Constance read the form. She read all of it. She had spent a career reading forms that decided what happened to people's bodies, and she was not going to sign one now without knowing what it said. The clause about the medication cart meant that the nitrate tablets she took for the tightness in her chest, the ones a person is supposed to be able to reach in 90 seconds, in the dark, without asking anyone, would now be kept in a locked drawer at the nurse's station, 40 feet down a hallway, dispensed at 8 and 5:30, twice a day, on a schedule that had nothing to do with a heart. She understood exactly what that meant. She signed anyway, because the alternative was the sidewalk, and she had already been on the sidewalk that morning. She surrendered the bottle. She counted the pills onto the counter herself, 14 halves, lining them up in 2 rows of 7 the way she had once laid out sutures on a tray. And Denise wrote the number 14 down without looking up, and drew a small box around it. The room in the East Wing had a window that faced the parking lot and a fluorescent tube over the sink that flickered on a 2-second cycle. Constance mentioned it at the front desk on her 3rd day. She was told maintenance had it on the list. On her 30th day, it was still flickering. She stopped mentioning it. She learned instead to do her small evening rituals in the dark. The folding of the day's cardigan, the winding of the rubber band around the green notebook, the pressing of her thumb once against Gerald's gap-toothed photograph before she set it face up on the nightstand where she could see it if the parking lot lights came through. She called him every Sunday. He answered less each week. The first Sunday he talked for 9 minutes and asked about the food and said Marissa said hello, though Marissa had not said hello. The 4th Sunday, 4 minutes. And there was a television going in the background of the house that used to be quiet. By the 8th Sunday, he did not pick up. And she left a message telling him the eggs at Cedar Grove were runny, but the woman who cooked them tried her best, and that she loved him, and that she was proud of him. And she did not mention her chest, which had begun to feel at night like a hand was resting on it, pressing, not hard, just present. She hung up and she did not cry. She wound the rubber band around the notebook. She pressed her thumb to the photograph. She had built her whole life so that this man would never have to sit in the cold. And she was not going to teach him now, at the end of it, that the cold was where she lived. The winter came into the East Wing through the window that faced the parking lot. The room had a radiator that knocked twice and then went silent for hours. And on the worst nights, Constance could see her own breath at 3 a.m. In the thin light off the parking lot, lamps and the cold came up through the floor tiles into the soles of her feet, the way cold does when a building has decided which rooms matter. Outside, the sleet came down on the asphalt in a way that sounded like someone frying something in a pan far off. A low, continuous hiss, and the wheels of the aide's cart squeaked past her door on a schedule she came to know by heart. And somewhere down the hall, a woman she never met cried out a name every night at the same hour and was every night not answered. This was the environment she was in when she began, without telling anyone, to count her nitrate tablets against the calendar. Because the tightness was coming more often now, and the drawer at the nurse's station was locked, and 5:30 was a long way from 3 miles in the morning. There was one kindness. The woman who cooked the runny eggs, her name was Amma, and she worked the kitchen from 4 in the morning, started sometime in the second month, leaving a paper cup of ginger tea outside Constance's door before the 8:00 breakfast. No note, still warm, the ginger cut fresh because Amma had noticed the old nurse pressing a hand to her sternum in the meal line. It was not medicine. It could not open a locked drawer. But it was one person seeing another as a human being before anyone with power arrived. And Constance drank it every morning at the window, both hands around the cup, and it was, for a while, the warmest thing that reached her. If this story is landing on you the way I think it is, subscribe now. Because what the woman across the road already knew, and what she was holding in a tin box under a market stall 400 yards away, is about to change everything you think you understand about the morning those suitcases went down. Then the false floor gave way, beneath what already felt like the bottom. In the 3rd month, a new resident moved into the shared half of Constance's room. A woman named Willa May, 81, sharp-eyed, who slept badly and talked to the ceiling. And Willa May, on her 2nd night, sat up in the dark and said, "You're the nurse. Carolinas. Labor and delivery, the night side." Constance said she had been, yes, a long time ago. Willa May was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You caught my granddaughter's baby. February. The girl who came in bleeding and the doctor was 40 minutes out. Everybody in that waiting room heard it later. You held it in with your hands." She did not say it warmly. She said it the way you report a fact that has been sitting in a drawer. "I have been trying to find you for 4 years to say a thing to you." And then, instead of saying it, Willa May lay back down. And at 2 the next morning, Constance woke to hear her whispering into a cell phone she was not supposed to have, saying a name and a room number and the words, "She is here. She is here. I found her." The woman who came to Cedar Grove 8 days later did not come for Constance. She came at 10:14 on a Thursday morning to visit Willa May, or so the sign-in sheet said. And she was a market woman by trade. She ran a produce and provision stall down on the corner near the old textile mill. And she smelled faintly of ripe plantain and the cedar shavings she packed her tomatoes in. Her name was Pauline. She was the sort of person the world walks past. She had been sitting at that stall corner for 19 years. And in 19 years, a person sees everything that a neighborhood tries to hide. She had seen Gerald Okoro grow up. She had also, she said quietly, been the one who called an ambulance the previous February, when her own niece went into labor bleeding on the sidewalk outside the mill because the girl had no insurance and had been turned away once already. It was that niece's baby Constance had caught. Pauline set a small paper bag of oranges on the nightstand next to the gap-toothed photograph. And she looked at that photograph for a long moment. And then she asked Constance a single question. She asked whether Constance had ever wondered why her son Gerald and the girlfriend, Marissa, had been in such a sudden hurry that particular spring to have the house to themselves and the deed put right. What Pauline said next changed the direction of everything that followed. The deed to the house on Beatty's Ford Road was not, and had never been, in Gerald's name. Constance had put it in a trust in 1998, on the advice of a lawyer at the hospital who ran a free clinic for the nurses because she had seen too many old women signed out of their own homes by their own children with a pen and a bad afternoon. The trust named Constance as the sole trustee for her lifetime, and it named a single successor trustee to act if she were ever declared unable to manage her own affairs. That successor trustee was not Gerald. It was Pauline, the market woman Constance had befriended 20 years earlier when Pauline first opened her stall, and Constance used to buy her Saturday plantains there. The one person in the neighborhood Constance had trusted enough to hold the papers in a tin box under the floor of her stall. Constance had forgotten. 20 years is long enough to forget the shape of your own protection. But Pauline had not forgotten, and what Marissa and Gerald had been doing for the 3 weeks before they set the suitcases on the sidewalk was trying to have Constance quietly declared incompetent so that the house would pass to Gerald as her only child, not knowing that the paper they needed to break already had a different name on it, and that the woman who held it sold tomatoes 400 yards from their front door. Pauline reached into her apron and set one more thing on the nightstand beside the oranges and the photograph. A small tin box, the kind that once held peppermints, its lid gone soft and rounded at the corners from 20 years of being opened and closed. Inside were papers folded in thirds, and the top page had Constance's own handwriting on it, and a notary stamp dated the 9th of March, 1998. Constance recognized the handwriting before she recognized what it said. She had forgotten the box. She had not forgotten the afternoon. She remembered now, all at once, sitting across from the clinic lawyer with a cup of vending machine coffee going cold, insisting on a clause he kept telling her she would never need. Pauline did not raise her voice when she explained what the box meant. She said it the way she'd tell you the price of okra. Then she took her phone out of her apron, and she made 2 calls, and she said very few words on either of them. To the lawyer who still ran the free clinic, she said, "It's time." To Willa May's grandson, who was now a fraud investigator with the state, she said, "Bring the file." And then she put the phone away and peeled an orange for Constance, and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying. The people from the trust arrived at Cedar Grove the following Monday, and their arrival is best understood by watching everyone else in the building. Denise at the intake desk, who had looked at the suitcases before the face, stood up so fast her chair rolled back and struck the file cabinet. The young orderly took his earbuds out. The administrator, a man who had never once come to the East Wing, came to the East Wing, and he stood very straight. And he called Constance Mrs. Okoro 3 times in one sentence. The lawyer set a leather folder on the table in Constance's flickering room, and opened it and turned it toward her. And Pauline stood by the window with her arms folded, and the state investigator stood by the door. The lawyer said 4 words. He said, "You are the trustee." He did not explain further, because Constance, whose mind had never been a kennel and had never been locked, understood immediately and completely. The declaration of incompetence Gerald and Marissa had filed had not been signed by any physician who had examined her. It had been signed on the strength of a form, and the form had a date, and the date was 3 days before anyone had ever spoken to Constance, which is a specific kind of paper that has a specific kind of name in a courthouse. The house was hers. It had never stopped being hers. And the trust gave the trustee, which is to say Constance herself, restored, the standing to unwind every document filed against her. She did not cry. She looked at the folder for a while. Then she asked one question of her own, and it was not about the house. She asked the lawyer whether her nursing pension, the one she had earned across 29 years, The one Gerald had been quietly redirecting to the joint account he'd opened in her name the previous spring could be traced. The investigator by the door answered. He said, "All of it." Constance nodded once. She wound the rubber band around the green notebook. She said she wanted to go home, and she wanted to stop at the pharmacy on Halstead on the way, because she was, once again, one day from empty, and she intended to buy the whole bottle this time, and not split a single pill. The reckoning was not dramatic, and this is why it held. Constance did not go to Gerald's door and shout. She never saw him at all that week. What happened instead was procedural and permanent. The false incompetence filing was withdrawn and referred. And referral of that particular kind of document is not a thing a person can unrefer with an apology. The trust, restored to its proper trustee, executed exactly as it had been written in 1998. And in 1998, Constance had added a clause the lawyer had gently argued against and she had insisted upon, because she had seen where families go. The clause said that any person named or unnamed who attempted to remove the trustee from her home by fraud forfeited every future interest in the estate. Gerald had been the only future interest. By trying to take the house early, he had, with his own hurry, signed it entirely away. The deed did not go to him and never would. Constance signed it that spring into a new trust, one that would, upon her death, fund 3 years of overnight shift childcare at Carolina's Medical for the nurses who worked the rotation nobody wanted, the one she had worked for 11 years so that no working mother's child would sit in the cold. She named the fund after no one. Pauline told her she should put her own name on it. Constance said the babies wouldn't care whose name was on the door, only that the light was on when they came. Doctors called Gerald 8 months after the morning he set the suitcases on the sidewalk. Not the doctors he expected. His mother's cardiologist called him, because Constance had at last been able to afford the surgery her split pills had been holding off. And because, even now, even after everything, she had left him listed as her emergency contact and had never taken his name off the form. He drove to Carolina's Medical, the same hospital where his mother had delivered 4,000 babies. And he came up to the surgical floor, and the nurse at the desk asked him who he was, and when he said he was her son. The whole desk went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when everyone already knows the story. They knew it because Pauline knew it, and Pauline knew everyone. They let him stand at the glass. His mother was on the other side of it, asleep, recovering, 119 pounds now, 10 pounds heavier than the Sunday on the sidewalk. And there was a green notebook on the tray table beside her with a rubber band around it. And there was a photograph of a gap-toothed boy holding a fish. Gerald stood at the glass, and he did not go in. A nurse folded a blanket at the foot of a bed down the hall, corner to corner, smoothed flat, tucked under so tight a coin would bounce off it, the way she'd been taught by the woman on the overnight rotation. And Gerald watched her hands, and then he turned and walked back down the hall he had grown up being walked to school by, and no one stopped him, because there was nothing there for him to take. Constance did not know he had come. Pauline decided not to tell her, and Willa May, who knew everything, agreed. Some mornings, the kindest thing you can hold is a fact that stays in the drawer. Gerald thought he had left his mother with nothing. A shared room in the East Wing, a flickering light, 14 half pills, and a bench out of the wind, if she was lucky. But the truth is that his mother had never carried her life in the things a person can put in a suitcase. She carried it in her 2 hands, the hands that had held a mother closed until the surgeon came, the hands that folded a blanket so a frightened woman would know someone competent was in the room, the hands that had once put a house into a trust in 1998, because she had already seen, 25 years early, the exact shape of the morning her son would one day arrive at. He had spent 3 weeks trying to prove she could not manage her own affairs. She had managed them so well, so long ago, that everything he did in his hurry ran directly into a wall she had built before he could walk. You can set a person's suitcases on the sidewalk. You can turn their pills over to a cart or two. You can change the locks and redirect the pension and file the paper and hurry the deed. But you cannot reach the thing a person built quietly, decades ago, out of everything they survived. And you cannot inherit from someone you were only ever trying to erase. The floor a careful woman lays under her own life does not disappear because someone above her stops believing it is there. And the morning he set those 2 suitcases down so gently on the sidewalk was the last morning of his life that he had any power over her at all. Because while Gerald was pulling the front door shut on the house that was never his mother was already sitting on the harder of the 2 cases, noticing a porch light left burning in the daytime. And across the road, a woman who sold plantains and forgot nothing was picking up her phone. If your mother spent her whole life making sure you never once had to feel the cold, and then someone convinced you that she was the one who had to go, would you recognize the moment while you were still inside it? And if you got it wrong, if you set the cases down gently and pulled the door shut, would you have the courage, 8 months later, to walk through the glass instead of turning around in the hall? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world sets out on the sidewalk right before it learns who they always were. I'll see you in the next one.